Okay, so you're coming from Tavistock and you have a number of years now working there, and can you introduce a little by yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Hurley and I'm a consultant child and adolescent psychotherapist, and it's a great pleasure to be in Mexico and part of the conference. I think my current role at the Tavistock is really around training. So I'm involved in training, coordinating training around child psychotherapy and also adult psychotherapy. And I feel really kind of quite passionately about how do we really get psychoanalytic thinking into institutions, because I think some of the ideas in psychoanalysis make so much sense, and I want to spread the word really.
Okay, just with the psychoanalysis ideas, just to spread all the institutions, because
yes,
sometimes it's like psychoanalysis is just a part in a little room and not in all the institutions. So how is that?
Well, I think the unconscious.
Okay.
Often things happen beneath the surface of relationships, and often things happen beneath the surface of organizations. So I'm very interested in unconscious dynamics and how that they get played out in relationships, in groups, in families, and also in organizations, and indeed in the relationships between different organizations. So there's a whole kind of, if you really pay close attention, it's very interesting what happens in all of these kind of matrix of relationships.
Yeah, and we're talking a little about the Tavistock approach, and it's like 100 years. So how can it be still in?
Okay, how can it still be relevant?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, the Tavistock is almost 100 years old, and its origins really were around the aftermath of the First World War, where soldiers were coming back from battle, really presenting with very worrying symptoms. Yeah. And today we would be thinking about that as post-traumatic stress syndrome, but back then, there wasn't that kind of expertise and knowledge. So the Tavistock came into being to really try and understand more what was the experience of those, battle-tired soldiers and what was happening for them. Now that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And as you know, there's been a huge, kind of evolution of the Tavistock in that time. And indeed, we've also seen Juconi, who now is in existence for over 20 years. Yeah. And how the beginnings of that organisation has really evolved into, something that's actually quite sophisticated today.
Yeah, it looks like.
And so I think the Tavistock has had a similar kind of journey, except it's been going a bit longer. So today the Tavistock is involved in, both clinical practice, providing both general mental health input, but also a range of specialist input in its clinical work. And alongside the clinical service, there's also a training service, a Department of Education and Training. So it takes a central role in providing training, not just for professionals like doctors and nurses and psychologists and social workers, but also, for people who are actually, working in different roles, like people working in children's centres, people in schools. So it's actually trying to disseminate the expertise that we've built up about the nature of mental health and how we can be of help. To a much wider population of workers, in a number of different kinds of organisations.
Okay, what would be the core of this? Because it's something like is the core, the heart of TAVI that is disseminating in all of these institutions, school organizations, and little places, and even in the internal the practice, the private practice for all the students that goes there. So,
well, in a way, I don't think there's one Tavistock.
Okay, so
and I think that's probably key, because I think that the Tavistock approach really looks in great detail at particular relationships, and almost in a bespoke way, and really tries to understand the particularities of, one relationship, rather than adopting a one-size-fits-all. Okay. But I suppose there are the common, what I value most, I think, about the Tavistock approach is that it's rooted in observation. Okay, so actually a lot of people working as adult psychotherapists and as child psychotherapists would have had some history of really studying observation. Either really observing a baby in its first year, so to really understand in ordinary life, something of the development of a baby, something of the development of early relationships in a family. So that would be key. And I suppose the other area that I think is key is something about learning from experience.
That's something that people sometimes think like I have to read a lot and then put it in experience, but the Tavistock is totally on the contrary. It's just go and learn from the experience. But how can you spread that in the world that really value the theory? So it look like the reverse sides.
Well, if we just take, for instance, the theme of the conference, which is something about safety.
Yeah.
It's about actually trying to create a safer environment where the temperature is brought down and violence, isn't as prevalent. Okay, so that's the theme of the conference in a way. And I suppose, from a learning from experience approach in thinking about safety, I'd want people to be reflecting and looking to themselves about how do I feel safe? Given that recently Mexico experienced, a natural disaster of gigantic proportion with the earthquake, I'd want to be, really facilitating people to think about what was that experience like for me. How did I feel during that experience, and how did I recover? And in that kind of close examination, I think people do come up with some thoughts that are usually very interesting, but not only to make sense of that experience for themselves, but also to help other people make sense of the experience.
And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe that will be related with my own experience or leads to my internal world and let me comprehend the internal world to the other. That could be related?
Most definitely it's related to the internal world.
Because internal world is something that and the Tavi is really named all the time.
The internal... Yes. Do you want to... Is there a question in there that you'd particularly...
Yeah, well, I would try to know, because internal world is something that is very named in Tavi. So
yes.
It's like part of this going from the experience and having the core Tavi.
Yes.
Try to spread.
Well, I suppose my kind of response to that is that in ordinary good enough families, children, are loved and made to feel safe for those formative years in early childhood. And so internally, they have a sense of figures who are helpful inside them.
Okay.
And so, if there is a problem in life, like for instance an earthquake, a child who has had the background of kind of an internal world with friendly adults who are trustworthy, they're more likely to actually be able to draw on resources to recover, in comparison with a child who's actually grown up with violence and abuse, who internally has very little to draw on. Inside themselves, there aren't helpful figures to draw on that can actually help get through disasters and other problems in life. So the internal world, I think,
it's a whole world.
Is a whole world, and it's it kind of is set up from the beginning of life, where a baby internalizes a sense of a mother who actually will feed them when they're very hungry.
Okay.
You know, so then there's a sense of a mother getting established inside themselves. Internally.
And internally. And I'm thinking how this is related, like the internal, the inner world of the baby, how the baby internalized kind of spread to the organization, because you were talking about the unconscious that is going between the relations between the baby, the mother, the relations in the school organization, and at the same time you're saying that Tavi will benefit when training the other. How can this circle could be good?
Well, I think you'll know that organizations are complicated places, and that there's actually, you know, the aim of an organization that's probably written down externally in all marketing materials, and then there's a whole kind of separate life of an organization that goes on under the surface of things in quite kind of complicated ways. I think we all recognize that being part of a group is a complicated thing.
It's complicated,
you know,
relationships everywhere.
It's complicated. So the Tavistock is quite active also in, you know, thinking about the nature of organizational life and trying to understand that better. You know.